Welcome. Today's post is, How McCarthyism Created Climate Change, UFOs, and Countdowns. Published on April 19, 2023. A lot of times you can solve a comm that's been active for generations by finding the origin point. No matter how many iterations a thing has over the years, it came into existence with a purpose. Here are the topics we'll be decoding today. You can always find this list in the description below. If you enjoy this video, please press the like button, and subscribe for weekly full-length blog posts, and shorter, more shareable videos. Let's begin. Symbols don't need to be proportional, but they often are. One of the best ways I have to solve comms involves looking for a pattern of two maximums that have no connection to one another yet inexplicably happened at the same exact time. Examining both of these things often ends up revealing a secret connection that explains one as the result of the other and ends up explaining the deeper meaning of both. Interstate Wedding. For example, consider the wedding of the century. An event remembered as the first modern event to generate media overkill. Know what happened at the same time? What are the odds that at the exact same time as this media overkill the largest check just so happened to be being cut from Washington? April 19, 1956. Wedding of the Century, movie star Grace Kelly marriage to Prince of Monaco. April 19, 1956. Federal Aid Highway Act introduced. The most expensive public works project of all time. I can only speculate as to the point of this, but I suspect the reason for this is that you can't easily create massive media fervor tied to something like the interstate. Nobody in their right mind would squeal with delight over the paving of a road, but women around the world would do that for a royal wedding of their favorite movie star. Money of this size is tied to ops, and so it needed a symbol so they could have the media demonstrate support for the direction. The direction involved an unprecedented amount of money over a long period of time and all sorts of implications tied to the various networks. Without this symbol there would be no way to know for sure which sides were supportive and to what extent. At least that's my assumption on it. I can be confident they are connected, but I can't read their minds. It's really obvious it's connected. Several things give this one away, not the least of which is the choice of venue. What is Monaco known for? Notice also her famous ring was emerald-cut diamond. Emerald green. It also likely unlocks emerald as a symbol for money, but I'll need to decode a few more emeralds before I can confidently say this is the case. For example, the richest man in the world, or close to it, is tied to what kind of gem in the mainstream media? April 13, 2023. Elon Musk offers 1 million Dogecoin to anyone who can provide evidence of emerald mine rumor. Of course, even if this is entirely a lie, it being in mainstream media makes it likely a comm. A message being sent more so than accurate reporting. It makes sense the richest man would have comms sent about his money. February 28, 2023. Elon Musk is the richest person in the world again. I decoded the connection between the marriage and funding as well as Monaco, but why Grace Kelly? Grace Kelly is most famous for her work in Hitchcock films, Rear Window, and Dial M for Murder. These famous movies are likely markers. Symbolism use as comms means we simply have to understand the films in relation to the time period. For example, May 29, 1954, First Bilderberg meeting. May 29, 1954, Dial M for Murder. Hitchcock Grace Kelly, a movie about laying a trap to catch a murderer plus phone symbolism. Bilderberg being the various companies getting together. I suspect it was to work out a relationship with ops in concert with the government. August 4, 1954. Rear Window UN Special Premier W-Aid headed by Eisenhower's brother. August 6, 1954. Atomic Energy Act initial approval. August 30, 1954. Atomic Energy Act of 1954. September 1, 1954. Rear Window US release. Moreover, the film itself is synonymous with watching/spying. Even if you've never seen the movie, you've probably seen parodies of it. I believe phone lines are constructed in tandem with roads, so creating a countrywide road system is facilitating a broader range for phones. Phones are the gateway to spying. Dial M for murder, it's about creating a network for spycraft. January 14, 1943, Highway Report prompts Congress to create the Interstate $500 million budget yearly. January 15, 1943, the Pentagon is completed. The spying would obviously be connected to Bell, who had a monopoly on phone lines until 1981. 1981 when Reagan broke up Bell, and look who happens to die in a car accident that same year. The initial wedding required a Catholic Church ceremony as well as one honoring Monaco. This clarifies it as a meeting of two factions, with one being the Rothschild/bank side. It was the first modern media overkill, with record viewership cements the Hollywood royalty. The plot gives context as it's about spying as a way to prevent takeovers of inheritance by backstabbing. It helps get a sense of the mindset of the time coming off of World War II. A fear of foreign loyal agents, aliens, everywhere. It also involved atomic trade transfer to foreign powers. So let's look at the foreign counterparts to the US version. December 16, 1959, Journey to the Center of the Earth, most popular sci-fi until 2001, Space Odyssey. December 17, 1959, UK Atomic Authority Act 1959. December 17, 1959, Bruno Sammartino pro debut through Vince McMahon. Why does McMahon's first mega-star connect? Read carefully. It's not the Atomic Energy Act. It's the McMahon Atomic Energy Act. That's the original version of it. Why Bruno Sammartino? This was the original big draw for the WWE/WWF. Title reign for close to 20 years starting in 1963. But, of course, that doesn't answer the why, and to understand that question we have to dissect that strange last name of his. Sammartino. May 17, 1963. Bruno Sammartino becomes the champion. San Martino. Which is exactly where the new pope was taken from. May 17, 1963, Bruno Sammartino becomes the champion. June 21, 1963, Pope from San Martino begins. It's easy to forget how important certain figures are. The first WWE/WWF first champion being a symbol tied to the Pope as well as the Atomic Energy Act. It becomes clear WWF/WWE comms in the early days with semi-nude wrestling was intended to represent blackmail. The decades-long reign of Sammartino representing the domination of the CIA ops which were tied to the church. This Operation Paperclip and the Vatican connection will become even more relevant shortly. But before we go too deep into that, consider what else was going on around this time. December 12, 1959, UN Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space is established. December 16, 1959, Journey to the Center of the Earth, most popular sci-fi until 2001, Space Odyssey. December 17, 1959, UK Atomic Energy Authority Act 1959. December 17, 1959, Bruno Sammartino pro debut through Vince McMahon. December 26, 1959, NFL coach John Madden weds Virginia Fields. May 17, 1963, Bruno Sammartino becomes the champion. June 21, 1963, Pope from San Martino begins. Releasing the biggest sci-fi film to date the day before the UK Atomic Energy Authority Act as well as the day before Bruno becomes champion for his first decade at the top. The meaning of this particular movie requires I explain. Jules Verne. November 1872, First International Football Match. November 1872, Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Prior to the CIA-type organizations with official government ops, there were private individuals coordinating around the world. Coordinating what? November 1864, Alice's Adventures Underground, original version of Alice in Wonderland. November 1864, Jules Verne Voyage to the Center of the Earth. Hopefully you've read one of my Alice in Wonderland decodes. The story as a symbol for the act of using a sleeping girl, sedated, as a way to blackmail during the early days of recording. Understanding the blackmail angle explains the story beats. Keep in mind, blackmail messaging is going to have messaging tied to scaring people who are blackmailed. This is why a major part of the story involves crying hysterically, allowing a young girl to open an otherwise closed door. This is how the door to the new world is opened in the story. The fear of accusations. Hence the symbolism of a tyrannical judge in the finale. I covered a bunch of iterations of the story in my Alice post, and the origin of the story is tied to Jules Verne and with a similar title no less. They both are using comms for the same thing. One is providing comms tied to the surface level as in The Child and Blackmail, but Jules Verne's books were famously ahead of their time and full of technology. They likely existed as markers for the people with the very first prototypes of electronic devices we all know today. The books were a necessary way to get new people with no idea of technology up to speed on the basic ideas of what was going on. This is just like how the author of Alice in Wonderland was one of the very first photographers. And quite likely the first that focused on taking pictures of children. Notice the coded language Lewis Carroll had as well as his clergy work. Remember that connection? The 1864 date tied to each is also a plot element of a South Park episode. Notice it involves a mine door to the underground, just like both books. I'm not decoding the episode, mind you, just bringing attention to the fact that they made an episode about 1864 and focused it on a secret locked area underground. November 1864. Alice's Adventures Underground, original version of Alice in Wonderland. November 1864. Jules Verne Voyage to the Center of the Earth. Which simply reinforces the point, they picked 1864 for the symbol because they were invoking the same underground comms of these two. The short answer is it's all a message about blackmail, and them choosing to invoke that specific story that specific day is not a coincidence. Nor is it that it became the biggest sci-fi film to date. December 12, 1959. UN Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space is established. December 16, 1959. Journey to the Center of the Earth, most popular sci-fi until 2001, Space Odyssey. December 17, 1959. UK Atomic Energy Authority Act 1959. December 17, 1959. Bruno Sammartino Pro debut through Vince McMahon. December 26, 1959. NFL coach John Madden weds Virginia Fields. May 17, 1963. Bruno Sammartino becomes the champion. June 21, 1963. Pope from San Martino begins. Thus we now have a good understanding of the situation with these atomic energy acts, but as there are multiple versions of them, why did it change over time? McCarthy and the Atomic Energy Act of 1954. The first major change with the nuclear legislation was allowing private companies to get involved. Why was there a need to create the Atomic Act of 1954 and bring private companies into the government nuclear game? The answer to that became clear when I dug into McCarthy. June 1954. McCarthy hearings conclude. June 1954. Atomic Energy Act. Now to understand this connection it's crucial to grasp the perception pushed by media. According to the media, McCarthy was trying to drum up witch trials. In fact, the very same month he gained power a movie was released to contrast it to the Salem witch trials. The control gained in 53 over Senate and House would be lost the following year. There was a screeching halt to a push being made and then moving into a new direction. Note Robert Byrd's interpretation. McCarthy brought about the most painful period in Congress history. Republicans lost both chambers but held the presidency. This is likely because of the Atomic Act and the Highway Ike's brother tied to the premier with the UN. But I can get more specific with a bit of decoding as to what happened. Before I share the calm that cracks open what happened, you need context. McCarthy is the name more tied than any other in creating panic and the Red Scare. McCarthy proclaimed there were over 200 members of the Department of State that are known communists. Now if you pay attention to the dates you may recognize that this was during the Operation Paperclip era. When foreign aliens were being snuck into jobs. I go into it in this post. But this week I've made more progress in the dig. August 26, 1946. Operation High Jump begins. September 3, 1946. Operation Paperclip approved by Truman. September 3, 1946. Five Eyes Canada Communications Security Establishment, CIA equivalent. September 4, 1946. NHL Commissioner Clarence Campbell takes over NHL. Sports are used for coordination in ops. The point being there were indeed secretly foreign people in positions at high government. In fact, the CIA officially sabotaged McCarthy and tried to discredit him. How did McCarthy go from leader of some kind of inquisition to a hated monster? The official answer is the death of a senator named Lester Hunt. A man was blackmailed by allies of McCarthy over his son's sexual orientation and activities and took his own life due to it. I say, official, because when I break down the comms the reality of what happened is more intriguing. The comm that unravels everything is what happened the day Lester Hunt died. McCarthy's reputation died due to negative media surrounding the tactics employed against Hunt. June 17, 1954. Televised Senate Army McCarthy hearings end. June 18, 1954. Casey at the bat. June 19, 1954. Lester Hunt suicide due to Herman Welker's blackmail. June 19, 1954. Harmon Killebrew signs to senators due to Herman Welker, McCarthy's closest ally. June 30, 1954. Atomic Energy Act introduced. What are the odds? Herman/Harmon. McCarthy's Herman Welker gets a man named Harmon Killebrew, nicknamed Killer, into the Senators' pro baseball team the same day Lester Hunt kicks off the end of the career of Joe McCarthy. Just 4 days after getting his job, the man named Killer made his debut for the Senators. Thus 4 days after the death of the senator as well. The hunt for Reds ended due literally to a senator named Hunt dying. Clearly the downfall of McCarthy was coordinated. The negative press was choreographed by McCarthy's allies. Notice that just before Lester Hunt died he went to Bethesda Naval Hospital. Why does that matter? Soon after McCarthy's fall from grace, both he and his blackmailing ally would visit the same Bethesda Naval Hospital and suddenly die. Just like Hunt did. May 2, 1957. McCarthy death at Bethesda. October 30, 1957. Herman Welker death at Bethesda. His other ally dying 4 years later. Final ally dying 4 years later allowed another comm to be sent. November 26, 1961. Spitball return rejected by MLB. November 26, 1961. Final McCarthy Red Scare pusher Henry Stiles blackmailer death. Symbol of rejecting that direction. 1961 is when the Un-American Committee tried to rebrand. People who die like Herman then become ghosts. October 15, 1957. First commercial flight to the Antarctic continent. October 16, 1957. Herman Welker brain tumor diagnosis. October 30, 1957. Herman Welker death. It's incredibly common when you notice the comms. For example, Angelo Bartlett Giamatti takes over MLB on April Fool's Day and then dies exactly 5 months later. April Fool's being a comm for it being a joke. Killebrew would have a long and successful career. The MLB logo is said to have been inspired by his uppercut-style swing. This in context implies ops surrounding him are representative of the sports league as a whole. I.e. narrative shaping and protecting secrets. This returns us to the point of the atomic legislation and bringing private businesses into it. January 31, 1950. Truman announces hydrogen bomb support. February 9, 1950. McCarthy proclaims there are communists in government service. February 13, 1950. Einstein warns of the danger of hydrogen bomb. Read my post on nuclear if you aren't familiar with this. Nuclear weaponry is symbolism tied to booms. One of which is the use of secret information to pull the strings. Like blackmail, being outed as a foreign agent is an example of this. Thus, after McCarthy upsets the wider comms community, a change is forced. An agreement to keep sensitive information out of government hands and place it into private ones through atomic legislation. It can get a little confusing at times who is who, so let me break down baseball from another angle. April 30, 1939. WTC origin at World's Fair, New York. March 30, 1939. Batman debut in Detective Comics, dated May 1939. Batman comic dated. Batman made his debut at the same time, WTC being a gathering of wealthy business people just like the star of Batman. Notice the fair at that time was promoted by pro baseball Batmen. Thus the symbol of Batman is literally a baseball bat plus rich businessmen. A symbol of companies banding together and trying to solve bigger problems. They do this through coordination, in part, through sports comms. None of this is to say McCarthy was correct in hunting aliens. There is much left to untangle. Complex circumstances with families caught up in a system. Being born into something you can't control. The goal for now is just to know. That Batman connection to big companies clarifies the common jokes made about Batman of his employing boys in tight shorts. The original Robin, named Dick Grayson, appeared just 1 year after the start. A symbol built into the origins and likely intended from the get-go. I'm referring to blackmail comms. First MLB commissioner was appointed as a judge by Teddy Roosevelt. Check one of my posts for the greater meaning on that one. Don't forget the McCarthy connection. The origin of the MLB symbol is tied to the ops, tied to narrative change. This is important this week because update, ending the luck streak. April 14, 2023. Toronto puts an end to Tampa Bay's record-tying win streak at 13. Ending at the unlucky number. What does this mean? The answer became clear when I looked at the record they tied. April 21, 1987. Brewers' streak ends at 13 with massive 1-7 loss against White Sox. April 22, 1987. Timberwolves expansion granted. Why does this matter? Who had the SS name of Timberwolf? The answer is George H.W. Bush. These were comms coordinating his fall from grace. The win streak ended literally right as his win streak ended, politics, as he was elected as POTUS for the last time. Apply that to today and what do you get? Any other figure in the same situation? This explains a set of comms around his election as well. The weekend transformation into a monster comms. Sent around the same time Biden won. Looks like we are at a transition point now with optics. The setup being long prepared with various cases in the background. Kanye as a third-party candidate being one of the likely avenues to pump up the numbers. Like Jill Stein in 2016 for HRC, hence the blue, Dem, muscle suit he wore in 2020 vote. It all has to come out eventually. Next, let's go into a topic that at a glance won't look related, yet. Climate change. It's often surprising to me just how connected everything is. For example, another major subject that has dominated the landscape for decades is climate change. Now at a glance nothing I've discussed so far connects, right? Well, the best place to decode a major subject is at the root. A lot of times you can solve a comm that's been active for generations by finding the origin point. No matter how many iterations a thing has over the years, it came into existence with a purpose. When I used the NYT archive to trace stories tied to climate change, I noticed the earliest one lined up with a very interesting historic event. May 1947. Does that ring a bell? Perhaps not, but it will become clear in a moment. May 1947. House Un-American Activities Committee convened in Hollywood to investigate allegations of communism in the film industry. May 1947. NYT, warming Arctic climate, melting glaciers fast, raising ocean level, scientist says. So that brings us back to McCarthy. The symbolism becomes clear as well. At least it is when we reconcile the other comms I've covered. It's 1947. What was being communicated via comms around that time? August 26, 1946. Operation High Jump begins. September 3, 1946. Operation Paperclip approved by Truman. September 3, 1946. Five Eyes Canada Communications Security Establishment, CIA equivalent. September 4, 1946. NHL Commissioner Clarence Campbell takes over NHL. Paperclip/High Jump. The latter of which involved symbolism of the Arctic as a symbol to discuss paperclip, i.e. moving spies into secret places. Therefore it melting means. The symbol of the Arctic melting due to warming is symbolism of spies losing their home, being outed as communists. This is how it was discussed in code for obvious my Antarctic posts for more on that. Solving the root gives us a cipher necessary to unlock modern equivalents. The point of this symbol is in how livable the environment is for spies. This is why the conversation has absurdities like calculations of cow farts. Flatulence is a symbol of saying taboo things. Nose equals nose. Most every body part and biological function as a relative symbolism. I've solved quite a few of them, but many more remain. Just this last week I solved nose as a symbol for nose, which explains mustache symbolism as hiding your face. Hiding your identity. This brings more clarity to my decode of the most famous Brady episode. The point involved the use of blackmail as revenge against betrayal. Understanding the nose symbol explains what was targeted. Changes nothing, but reinforces my decode. Anyway, let's return to global warming. I included the discussion of flatulence as a symbol mostly so that I could bring up this next point. March 16, 2023, Gwyneth Paltrow reveals she had rectal ozone therapy for wellness. Ozone being the invisible shield that protects us from the sun. Sun rays equals visibility. Thus the hole in the ozone is symbolism for exposure. To understand this fully we again have to go to the origin point. Which was tough to find a precise date to outside of May 1985. I eventually found the precise date as May 16, 1985. Which lines up with the release, secretly, of information from the DOJ about Robert Maxwell's PROMIS software. This is the precursor to NSA's PRISM software. Snowden exposed. It explains the comms as this information had only been released that same day. Thus we see public comms sounding the alarm about what is seen in classified data. So with that in mind we see the hole they were discussing. A vulnerability that would in time expose networks of people. Not unlike the threat of being labeled a communist co-conspirator, thus it utilizes the same symbol. The Antarctic stories told in major media publications are now readable. The protective layer of shielding being removed. Equals identities now at risk of being seen. The Robert Maxwell connection to the collection of data is also critical and helps clarify the more modern variants. For example, April 22, 2016, Maxwell deposition about crimes against children. April 22, 2016, Paris Agreement signed top 10 most important contracts of all time. I added that, top 10 most important contracts of all time, because of this, which is not an official source, but it gives a good window on public perception. Putting it right up there with the Magna Carta and the Louisiana Purchase. With all that in mind, the legal battle over Maxwell becomes a lot more transparent. Why there was a countdown and what it has all been leading up to. I already covered how sports are used to coordinate ops, but one part I've had trouble with is gaining clarity on the scope of it. I had several breakthroughs this week, and this is just one of them. Sports and nations. I dug into the sports commissioners of the Big Four leagues. Defined as supreme leadership. 1921st Commissioner of U.S. Pro Baseball appointed. 1921st Commissioner of U.S. Pro Football appointed. 1920 United Nations Precursor League of Nations founded with U.S. President Woodrow Wilson as lead architect. Odd coincidence? No, what's even stranger? Many serve for decades and yet. 1946 First Commissioner of NBA appointed. 1946 Second Commissioner of MLB appointed. 1946 3rd Commissioner of NHL appointed. 1946 6th Commissioner of NFL appointed. 1946 League of Nations dissolved, becomes United Nations. I need an asterisk besides one of those four. I found consistent dates for 3 quarters, but MLB articles give 4 different dates on various old NYT and other newspaper articles I dug through. So it's either 1945 or 1946, but either way. This clarifies something important. It clarifies the relationship sports have to global coordination. In fact, notice the old newspaper literally gives 2 subjects. New Sports Commissioner plus United Nations setup. The introduction of a Supreme Leader Commissioner happened at the same time after WW1. September 17, 1920, NFL founded plus Commissioner. October 20, 1920, Miramar, Top Gun, closes post-war for 9 years. November 12, 1920, MLB First Commissioner Mountain Landis. Same thing happened after World War II. The fact that it closed its doors right before the new sports started up. The network set up during the war I suspect transitioned into sports. This especially makes sense in context of my recent Top Gun decode as it ties to football. What about the other super popular sport for the wealthy then? Horse racing. Ever hear of a Triple Crown winner? June 1919, first Triple Crown winner in history wins the Kentucky Derby. June 1919, Treaty of Versailles establishes League of Nations the following year. First one. There have been 13 since then and the 7th one happened in 1946. I have many posts that explain how sports are rigged and that includes horse racing. The information sent during sports is used to coordinate major changes across the country. I say, country, but these details clarify it. It's not just countrywide but worldwide. This helps clarify a number of my decodes tied to the Mariners. The symbolism of Ken Griffey Sr. and Jr., KGB symbol, taking over the KGB, Reds, post-USSR fall. His famous, backwards hat. The story tied to it, I wanted to wear my dad's hat, not that I needed any more evidence for that transition, but that's a strong confirmation there. Anyway, all this means I can now dig into war in relation to sports. January 20, 1949, Point 4 Program for giving technical assistance to developing countries. January 20, 1949, Pro Football Free Substitution adopted for 1 year. Agents to help set up comms for other countries. These connections may help clarify the connection with horse racing to other major sports. For example, why the owner that won the Triple Crown horse was named John Madden. That's a rather well-known name when it comes to the NFL, I'm sure you know. I say, may help clarify because I need to reconcile these new findings. I understand the pieces separately, but it's time I take a step back and looked at the big picture with these new pieces. Time to explain the whole thing. World Summary. Q offered a good way on how to look at the highest level of things. The puppet masters can broadly be viewed as tied to one of 3. Rothschild/Sod/Soros. Rothschild has strings tied to financial institutions, the Catholic Church, and has ties to controlling governments around the world. Rothschild being central bank control gives us a strong foundation from which to build out our comprehension of the rest of the world. For example, I have extensive decodes of the Titanic and the propaganda war that followed it. Nautical symbol and the original story even involves a story of dying at sea, and most importantly the whole story of Titanic is tied to a rush for lifeboats. The symbol of lifesaver, as it says. How do you get a lifesaver? By cooperating with the Mint. A word that is literally used by the Federal Reserve's own website to describe itself. By making the original lifesavers Mint, it carries the symbol of how to save your own life. A message in a media campaign, and its succeeding lasts as a long-lasting message that forever promotes the original point while still retaining a useful symbol that can be used in all sorts of places. It's not the only one either. Just check that post linked above for more on that. None of this means the companies are evil, only that like many things in this world there is an ugly history. Honestly, it'll probably be cathartic for the people in charge now that know this history to get it out in the open when it's time. Anyway, the Titanic happened because they needed to remove Astor. They had to remove Astor because he had enough control over the Republicans in Congress to ensure the Fed wouldn't get the votes needed. This control he had over Congress was built on his hotels. This is where strings were attached. Without strings, they would have likely been bought or simply blackmailed. Thus the USA had what amounted to a hostile takeover, and it plunged it into the Great Depression. This was done to take over the resistance across the country in the form of freedom-loving business owners. By controlling the Fed they controlled dollar and forced compliance of the various companies across the country. This created World War II in multiple ways and was coordinated in comms as I go into in this post. The goal was removing as many people as possible, and to that point a villain was necessary. This does not mean Hitler was their ally. The truth is more logical. If creating a force that is destined to implode, would anyone be dumb enough to tie themselves to it? No, he was given power from a distance through media support and coordinated in comms the public would never see. This complex causality is why it can get confusing to understand history. At a glance it seems like Rothschilds are the good guys in World War II as I've decoded them as behind FDR in numerous posts. FDR equals Federal Reserve, but it's one of those 4D chess situations in the worst way. The US and other allied military on the other hand are the good guys in World War II. Unless you want to suggest that stopping genocide is a bad thing. The use of nuclear weaponry ended World War II as one of the two represented the removal of Hiram Johnson. Using blackmail. It's not that Hiram Johnson created peace, but if you read the newspaper you'll see he was the leader of the resistance to global alliances in the Senate. Him dying, along with FDR and Hitler, gave Truman a path to build anew. April 12, 1945, FDR death. April 30, 1945, Hitler death. However, this license to build did not come cheap. The agreement that got the Rothschild banks to cooperate is what we know as Bretton Woods. The use of this system was an agreement to give the USA the keys to the world as the reserve currency. It was a hostile takeover that forcibly attached strings to the various heads of business, and as a result it's confusing at times to differentiate between the two. As I said, you don't get a voice in the first place if you aren't willing to play the game. Those that decide to try a different game get shut down. So, play the game, they did. 1921st Commissioner of U.S. Pro Baseball appointed. 1921st Commissioner of U.S. Pro Football appointed. 1920 United Nations Precursor League of Nations founded with U.S. President Woodrow Wilson as lead architect. 1946 First Commissioner of NBA appointed. 1946 Second Commissioner of MLB appointed. 1946 Third Commissioner of NHL appointed. 1946 Sixth Commissioner of NFL appointed. 1946 League of Nations dissolved, becomes United Nations. The coordination of these global machinations from then and until today has been done using sports and all other forms of media. There is at times a particular rift between those affiliated with the tactics of the Titanic and other tragedies and those that want law and push for justice is what underpins conflicts that took out JFK and others. In particular, the use of brainwashing from childhood to create killers has created some of the deepest rifts. Programming a child over decades and transforming them into a monster is a tool with many uses. Used to take over businesses, start wars, weaken countries, and more. This system is akin to having a loaded gun on you at all times if you step out of line. The pushback to these tactics is what led to Waco, which itself is a critical symbol tied to things going on today. To remove this system required unprecedented changes, and it has underpinned everything going on today. 17 walks. Sports are used to coordinate just about everything, and that includes blackmail. March 13, 1893, Waldorf Astoria Hotel built the largest, most tech-savvy hotel in the world. April 8, 1893, First ever college basketball game in the world by Vanderbilt, Cooper/Geneva, UNHQ, Beaver Falls. That includes today. For example, just yesterday. Mets draw 17 walks in 17 points against 6 over A's. I suspect this is symbolism in a legal sense. Letting someone walk, as in despite potential guilt. 17 equals Q, as in some secret people getting to walk. If my theory is right, then I'd bet the leader in walks would have some kind of calm tied to getting out of jail. Who is the all-time leader in walks? Barry Bonds. Bonds as in a bail bond, what you pay to go home instead of stay in jail. Don't misunderstand though, this is surely a good thing. I may get in trouble one day for being too optimistic, but I'm sure the right people are in the right places for a better future. Now in the past it's a bit less clear when things are going well, for example. September 24, 2004. Record consecutive walks by Barry Bonds, 7 in a row. September 24, 2004. Kevin Mitnick film long delayed released about evading federal agents. I'm not sure yet what this means, but I doubt it's coincidence a movie delayed for 4 years about the most famous hacker in the world escaping the law. And it just so happens to hit the same day Barry Bonds, the guy most famous for walks than any other player, just so happens to have that record reach its peak when the film came out. If I had to guess, I'd say it's tied to the DCI-CIA being installed the same day. However, I don't know enough about this job to say whether that's logical or not. It simply fits a pattern I've seen tied to famous job appointments the same day as media releases as a way to announce the point of the appointment to the comms world. Perhaps that job allows some kind of control over intel so as to let people walk. Well, while these kinds of connections are unclear to me on the morality, I'm confident things are going in a good direction today. After all, I've been allowed to explore truth after all, even if it has been in a vacuum. That alone is a good indicator of things to come, because what else could you call what I do other than laying groundwork for transparency? The strings are firmly in place for many heroes and villains in the world. Untangling it is a daunting task, but not impossible. For example, the use of weaponizing data collection and scaring plants by revealing puppet strings. This is the essence of global warming as a symbol. An environment that cultivates a perspective to maintain secrecy. To keep their livelihood from getting too hot, people choose to ignore evil. To never go against the grain and protect victims. Everyone tries to protect themselves, and as a result the only ones that get protected are the villains. Trying to upend that control leads the masses of plants to turn against the one that tries. I believe people are inherently good, it's a screwed up system that has caused so much tragedy. I don't blame people born into a system, but if they choose to ignore and maintain a system of tragedies, then they probably shouldn't be placed in positions of power. I say, shouldn't be, but of course that's the real trick, isn't it? If the populace understood who was screwing them, they wouldn't buy from the villains or elect them, would they? That's why the solution has always been visibility. This is why I occasionally talk about my past. I was an MK victim and I try to cultivate an environment conducive to the best ending for all. I've never told my full story, small pieces were told but not the worst. What little I said was in a censored way so as to avoid a myriad of problems I feared from talking publicly. If you've read my posts, you've seen a few little pieces I throw in here and there about my past. I do so only when it reinforces a point with personal experience. I don't want attention, and I would prefer readers not bring up what I write about my past to me. When people bring up my past, I cringe. I don't like to think about it. Who likes thinking about trauma? It's something I speak of in a detached way, like someone with a microscope examining bacteria. I speak of it now because unless I'm a liar or insane, then it lends weight to my words on everything else I've said. I was brainwashed to be a monster a long time ago, but we are all brainwashed to varying degrees by the world we live together in. There is no reason to cry about who is the biggest victim. In society today, the act of reacting has been twisted into a masturbatory act. As a result, people obsess over minor nonsense rather than the real horrors all around them. It's all intentionally distracting, and so long as all the puppet string surrounds the world forcing people to move to and fro, it likely can't ever be fixed. An invisible massive string so few see. People need to see it, and it needs to be untangled. I see the world as though it were a giant jumble of fishing tackle. This is why I spend every day researching and presenting my findings to untangle it. I'm not a genius, and what you see is the result of hard work over years. Anyone can do what I have done to figure things out, and that is a fact. My work demonstrates this fact by how many plants are all around us that know it. The difference is environment and a cultivated desire to pursue something real. I'm not perfect, but I am trying to better myself. I appreciate the scant few that have taken my words and done the same for themselves. I believe the whole world needs to find such a path, and I believe it will happen. The show may be hard to follow at times, but if you've been reading my work, you know it's still going great. We've been promised a great ending after all. Smiley face. I'm not sure yet what that will entail, so I try and learn as much as possible and help others do the same. I am not aware of anyone doing what I do, but I do see signs this might change. For example, just today I randomly clicked on a YouTube video and was surprised. UFO equals paperclip. Now that looks like a silly parody, sure, but look closely. It's not being subtle. It's outright asserting that Operation Paperclip is tied to alien infiltration. That's half a breath away from giving the precise, accurate historical truth I've long decoded about aliens. This random find made my day. The symbolism is perfect too. First, sour, i.e., hated due to Nazi ties. Then, sweet, as in their past was erased, taking on new identities under paperclip. They go from hated to loved. It uses the classical flying disc shape, but there were a few types which unlock more of the symbolism. September 3, 1946. Operation Paperclip approved by Truman to bring Nazis secretly into the country. July 8, 1947. Roswell UFO, disc shape. September 18, 1947. CIA formed. SIG being the original name for CIA, which was founded 2 months after Roswell. Hence a cigar being used to represent them. That wasn't the only symbol used. The government had a very different one. August 26, 1946. Operation High Jump begins. September 3, 1946. Operation Paperclip approved by Truman. Why the different symbols? Think about it. The government symbol is a sterile one, but the media one is anything but. It turned it into a horror story and allowed the public to react. Obviously they couldn't do that with Antarctica. So that's one of the reasons why there are often symbolism synonyms. The famous War of the Worlds invasion panic. May 1, 1952. Adamski UFO sighting. May 1, 1952. Mr. Potato Head debut. It was also the same day Mr. Potato Head with the creating a new face. A face meant to invoke the mustache and cigar-smoking Groucho Marx. I went over before nose as nose symbolism with a mustache as a way to hide identity. I go over a com about damaging a nose as it relates to blackmail. This ties to Sound of Music, as Hammond also starred as the young sibling in a movie about escaping Nazi Germany. In one instance we have hiding identity, and in the other the repercussions when an identity is damaged. Sound of Music was also the first song used in the first Super Bowl, which reinforces the connection of sports to moving international agents. Another famous mustache symbol is Mario. A symbol I've had a lot of trouble decoding, but I bring it up because it's the top movie in America. The more popular something is, the more likely the comms are important, so what's the point of this one? I intend on doing a full decode of this one in the future, post-theater, but I do have a theory based on the casting and wiki bio. The casting of Chris Pratt is particularly interesting because he was the star of Guardians of the Galaxy, a film Q highlighted as Guardians of the, a movie specifically said to be playing as one of the final posts. I suspect the symbol behind Chris Pratt is that of a pratfall. Which is to say the symbol is tied to the cases going on where things are uncovered. Comms aware people intentionally taking falls so as to facilitate exposure. Course that's only my hot take, I need to watch it to get a clear idea. It fits perfectly what I've seen going on from different angles, but that doesn't mean it's the correct answer. Japan just beat the US team in the World Baseball Classic. March 1, 2023, South Park Japanese toilet episode plus JFK conspiracy episode. March 22, 2023, Japan beats US World Baseball game 3-2. The episode 1 decode in that post is all about disclosure. But it's not clear to me yet how Japan fits in precisely with the legal things. Here's another set of comms tying it to a courtroom. The trial of the killing of Mario by Wario played by Elon Musk. I'll probably make a Mario-centric post in the future to finish cracking some of the more prominent ones the last year. Update on countdowns. Countdowns update. I made a breakthrough this week on one of my most important decodes. First the old stuff. September 26, 2020. Joe Biden, I got to the Senate 180 years ago. Plus 180 days equals March 25, 2021. March 25, 2021. Joe Biden, when I came to the US Senate 120 years ago. What are the odds of that? He makes a gaffe of, 180 years ago I got to the Senate, and then exactly 180 days later he makes the exact same gaffe of when he got to the Senate, but this time 120 years instead of 180 years. This countdown would lead to another one. September 26, 2020. Joe Biden, I got to the Senate 180 years ago. Plus 180 days equals March 25, 2021. March 25, 2021. Joe Biden, when I came to the US Senate 120 years ago. Plus 120 days equals July 23, 2021. July 22, 2021. Joe Biden, way back 150 years ago when I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee. This is where context is key. It doesn't just line up to his other gaffes, it lines up to the Tokyo Olympics nuclear opening. Fukushima disaster. Because of the pandemic, the Olympic Games of China and Japan were only 180 days apart. This is why his gaffe of plus 180 fits perfectly. August 8, 2021, Tokyo Olympics end. Plus 180 days equals February 4, 2022. February 4, 2022, China Olympics start. Now take a look all together. September 26, 2020, Joe Biden, I got to the Senate 180 years ago. Plus 180 days equals March 25, 2021. March 25, 2021, Joe Biden, when I came to the US Senate 120 years ago. March 25, 2021, Olympic torch begins its 121-day journey around Japan starting at the nuclear disaster site. Plus 120 days equals July 23, 2021. Japan Olympic torch passing event ends. July 22, 2021. Joe Biden, way back 150 years ago when I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee. July 23, 2021. Tokyo Olympics start. Japan is 16 hours ahead from the USA, thus for Japan it was already July 23 when Biden said it. August 8, 2021. Tokyo Olympics end. Plus 180 days equals February 4, 2022. February 4, 2022, China Olympics start. Why did Joe Biden send messaging tied to two different Olympics? The answer to this is tied to the pandemic push. October 18, 2019, Bill Gates Global Coronavirus Simulation. October 18, 2019, Wuhan Military World Games begins. Plus 30 days. November 17, 2019, Wuhan COVID first appears. Some might call it a takeover. Now let's get into my new findings. Why did Biden begin the countdown September 26, 2020? September 26, 2020, Joe Biden, I got to the Senate 180 years ago. September 27, 2020, 44-day war begins in NK. At a glance this appears arbitrary, but notice I cut off the red arrow which leads to my next data point. I did that because there are several contextual points I need to explain before I show you the boom. The first thing I need to explain is the meaning behind it being 44 days. My last post focused on 44 comms. March 27, 2020, equals Q highlights, 4, Fed takeover. Plus 4. March 31, 2020, equals end of Trump's 15 days COVID plan. Plus 4. April 4, 2020, equals Marine countdown ends. Plus 4. April 8, 2020, equals military plus Starlink live fire drone/missile shootdown. Plus 4. April 12, 2020, Palm Sunday Easter Sunday equals Harvest Week. I covered this recently because of all the 4/4 comms surrounding Trump's arrest on April 4th. Now let me reveal what was hidden in the 44-day collage. September 26, 2020, Joe Biden, I got to the Senate 180 years ago. Plus 180 days equals March 25, 2021. September 27, 2020, 44-day war begins in NK. Plus 44 days. November 10, 2020, second NK war ends November 10, 2020, emergency message date about 17K deaths. At a glance this looks irrelevant, but, what's that last data point? That last data point is a rabbit hole and a half. I remember quite well all the hubbub over Trump and emergency alert messages. So, what did it mean for there to be a 44-day war in NK? This is where things get clear. November 10, 2020, first U.S. murder hornet nest contained 500 live specimens. November 10, 2020, Rebecca Jones emergency announcement speak up before 17K are dead. November 10, 2020, second NK war Armenian breakaway ends after 44 days. I've long decoded the murder hornet comms as to be about takedowns in that world. It's even more clear now because of the person who sent the emergency message. A person famous in connection to tracking COVID. The same day the NK war ended, what did she do? She illegally used the state's emergency alert system to broadcast this message. Speak up before another 17,000 people are dead. 17/Q comms, symbol of a massive number of secret people in danger. The person responsible for COVID tracking software saying this. Reconcile with murder hornets. The panic of encroaching law and order. Hostage situations around the world. Just like Trump, she has been hoisted into the national spotlight with scrutiny, all to broadcast a message. Tied to tracking COVID in relation to school shootings. Those news reports are this month. Charged alongside Trump's timeframe. All of it broadcasting messaging of arrests coming to those tied to that world that aren't cooperating. What is it all leading up to? Kill, legacy blue check marks, on April 20th. Might represent the old guard going away in some fashion. That's just my first take, I have a way to go to finish decoding theses comms. But you can see the progress week to week. Though I will say I think the point of the NK war was much like in Afghanistan. A cleanup that was timed to other things going on globally. A message to the other dark places in the world that a cleanup was coming. What did it really mean to change direction in Afghanistan? Telegram chat. Join the Decoding Blog Telegram group. Begin decoding. Send leads. D. This has been How McCarthyism Created Climate Change, UFOs, and Countdowns.